Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week we're taking a look at the Eric Clapton signature Fender Stratocaster. Is it worth the hype? Now, considering that signature models are very much part of the fabric of today's guitar industry, it's somewhat hard to believe that it actually took Fender the best part of 38 years to release their first. That guitar, of course, being the Eric Clapton signature Stratocaster, released in 1988, followed very shortly, it should be said, the same year in fact, by the Yngwie Malmsteen Strat. Now, in 33 or so years that have elapsed since then, countless Fender signature models have come and gone, but unsurprisingly, the Eric Clapton signature Strat remains in production to this day, and save for one or two very subtle changes over the years, remains remarkably unchanged. Now, I've actually owned this particular Clapton Strat, or more accurately, I guess, Clapton Strats, plural, you'll come to that in a bit, for several years now. But in case you missed the article on guitar.com recently about its rebuild or its restoration, it's not been fully functioning for a very long time. After a short stay with Hugh Price, a name you may recognise from the restoration of my 62 Strat last year, it's now up and running and fully functioning, and over the last few weeks I've really gone to great lengths to not only put it through its paces, but just live with it and spend as much time as humanly possible with it, to really get to grips with it and hopefully get to the bottom of, is it any good? Now rewind to 1986, and with Clapton's new record August riding high in the top 40 on both sides of the Atlantic, then head of Fender Dan Smith approached Eric with the concept of releasing a guitar bearing his name, Fender's first ever official signature model. Eric reportedly loved the idea and specified that the guitar very much be based on his favourite late 50s parts caster Blackie, specifically the V-profile neck. Now if you've never played a mid to late 50s Stratocaster, depending on year, their V-profile can be be pretty drastic to say the least, and if you're not accustomed to it, can make for a pretty unusual playing experience. Now, this is something Fender were seemingly aware of because the first prototype they returned to Eric had a much softer V-profile neck that, ironically, he actually preferred. Now, the production model ended up with 22 frets and a 9.25-inch radius board, but the initial prototype that Eric received reportedly had 21 frets, 22 being obviously more relevant and more modern, I guess, to what Fender were making at the time. Eric also specified that the guitar be manufactured in 3 colours. Pewter grey, undoubtedly the most common of the 3. You can see him playing pewter grey Strats countless occasions on gigs, live DVDs, tours, etc. over the years. Torino red, or Ferrari red, you can actually see a prototype of this here late in 1986 on Tearing Us Apart with Tina Turner. And most unusually, and the most rare of the 3, 7-Up green. Clapton did actually play this guitar on several occasions in the late 80s, although seemingly only when it matched his shirt. And where the Clapton Strat really sets itself apart from other Strats is its mid-boost circuit. Now, when speccing the guitar, Eric specified very clearly that he wanted a way of fattening it up. Essentially, a solo boost built into the guitar without being reliant on maybe changing the channel on your amp or turning a solo boost pedal on and off. Now, the initial prototype that Eric received had a 14 decibel boost, fairly substantial, built into the guitar that was operable by the second tone control. Clearly, Eric wasn't happy because the final production model ended up with a 25 decibel boost, that is pretty substantial, built in again to the second tone control. Basically, you can turn up and turn down. It's a boost at around about 500 hertz. Couple that with 3 very distinctive Fender branded lace sensor pickups, which, to quote Abe Simpson,
which was the style at the time.
Contrary to very common misconception, lace sensor pickups are indeed true single coil pickups, although in much a very similar fashion to Jaguar pickups actually, are surrounded by a metal barrier, essentially meaning they're less susceptible to electromagnetic interference, meaning they're less noisy. The guitar was also equipped with a TBX tone boost circuit on its first tone pot, the idea being there that you can not only cut treble, but add it. If you were using the mid-boost circuit, there could be a perceived lack of clarity, I guess, so the ability to dial in a little bit extra treble could be essential to really making sure that the guitar does cut through. All of this is, of course, powered by a 9-volt battery, which is housed in the back trem cavity, which, incidentally, comes blocked off with a piece of wood from the factory, as per Eric's specifications. Now, considering 33 years have elapsed since its introduction, as I said, the guitar's spec has remained remarkably unchanged, actually. The first change of note coming in 1991 when Eric finally caved and agreed that the guitar be made available in black, much like Blackie, the guitar that it was ultimately based on, as well as a brief foray into a version with a rosewood fretboard. However, it's believed that only 94 or so of these actually escaped the factory, so clearly not something that was a particularly long-lived venture. 1996 saw the introduction of an Olympic white version, with the last major and only real notable change coming in 2001 when Fender switched from lace sensor pickups over to their new vintage noiseless pickups. Aside from that, the spec is remarkably unchanged, which I guess brings me on to my personal guitar. And I picked this guitar up for a song about 10 years ago, I guess, primarily because the electronics were rather suspect, presumably because the prior owner had decided at some point to migrate them over to a different body. Now, on a normal Stratocaster, this wouldn't present too much of an issue if you knew what you were doing. However, as we've established, the Eric Clapton Strat is by no means a normal Stratocaster, and the extra circuitry and circuit boards do require a fair amount of substantial routing. That extra routing is made even more substantial if you undertake it with what appeared to have been a blunt spoon on the replacement body. Luckily, I picked up a replacement pewter body on eBay, coupled that with the neck, which is dated as 1993, and a new set of lace sensor pickups, as the originals seem to be on their last legs, and after many years, the guitar is finally up and running. It's got a bit of a quirky kind of 1950s meets 1980s vibe going on, I guess, with that stark single-ply white pickguard, very indicative of late 50s Strats, obviously with those covered lace sensor pickups, which again are very indicative of the late 80s, early 1990s. The soft V profile is incredibly comfortable. I think the neck profile is probably my favourite part of this guitar. I really do like it. And even the mid-boost circuitry, which I guess could be a little bit of an acquired taste if you're not particularly used to hearing that in Stratocasters, is actually incredibly usable. And having grown up listening to records like Journeyman and 24 Nights, it is one of the few signature guitars I've ever played that you really could consider as a bit of a silver bullet in regard to nailing its namesake tone. The combination of those lace sensors and that mid-boost circuitry really does transport you back to a time of smoky black and white music videos with big Nigel Mansell moustaches and oversized bomber jackets, or a little bit later, swish Armani suits and a cigarette burning nonchalantly in the headstock. So is it worth the hype? Now, of course, ultimately, this is going to come down to you personally and what you are looking to get out of a Strat. If you're a Clapton fan, it's a bit of a no-brainer. It really does nail his tone and vibe. But if you're not, I guess if you were to be critical, you could say that on the earlier models, the lace sensor pickups do look somewhat dated, very indicative, of course, the time in which they came from. But if you're buying a newer model with the noiseless pickups, that's, of course, not going to be an issue. Personally, I would say I prefer rosewood fretboards, although I do have a kind of sneaking admiration for Eric specifying that it only be made available in his preferred specs. Ultimately, it is his signature product. The mid-boost circuitry is obviously great if you're looking to recreate Clapton's tone, but even if you're not necessarily an Eric Clapton fan per se, you could definitely find use for that because it does make for a very versatile Stratocaster. Clearly, Fender have included something very similar on the recent Lincoln Brewster Stratocaster. If you're looking just for a subtle kick above the mix for maybe a solo or a certain part, but you don't want to have to change your amp or turn a pedal on and off, it has use there. Although to counter that, I would say that I've never really been a fan of guitars, particularly that are reliant on a battery in any way, shape or form. With my forgetfulness and level of organisation, that is just a recipe for disaster and undoubtedly will let me down at a moment when I could really do without being let down. In short though, I'm so glad I've got this guitar up and running, especially for studio work. Even if I wouldn't necessarily trust myself to remember to take a spare battery for live performances, I can definitely see myself getting a hell of a lot of use out of it. And as I said, the neck is arguably the most comfortable I've ever played on a Stratocaster. Really pleased I got it up and running. As I said, there's a full article on guitar.com about its restoration or its rebuild, I guess, if you want to check that out. But as ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And I shall see you next week back at home for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers, guys. Take care. I'll see you soon.